Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a place so unbelievably massive, it literally spans 6 time zones. We're talking about Canada. Stretching all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific and right up into the freezing Arctic, it's the second largest country on Earth. It's this incredible mix of towering mountains, endless forests, crystal clear lakes, and these really modern, bustling cities. But it really makes you wonder, right? How exactly did this absolute giant of a nation become what it is today? Well, stick with me here, because Canada's story is just an incredible journey. It's packed with surprising discoveries, some pretty dramatic conflicts, and remarkable achievements that are honestly still shaping our modern world. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the first peoples and early explorers. Then, empires and rivalries. Third is the birth of modern Canada. After that, forging an independent identity. Then we'll cover the modern economic powerhouse, and finally, facing the future. So, kicking things off with Section 1, First Peoples and Early Explorers. Long before any Europeans arrived, Canada was already home to millions of Indigenous people. The First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities had been living across this vast country for thousands of years. And they didn't just survive, they built thriving societies. They hunted, fished, traded, and developed these amazing, unique cultures that were perfectly adapted to some incredibly diverse and, let's be honest, often really harsh environments. And what's absolutely fascinating here is that they created massive trade networks connecting distant regions. We're talking networks as complex and far-reaching as our modern highways. That profound knowledge of the land, it continues to shape Canada to this very day. Fast forward a bit, and around 1,000 years ago, Norse explorers led by Leif Erikson briefly set up a small settlement in what's now Newfoundland. That was the first known European presence in North America. But then there's just silence for nearly 500 years. It isn't until the late 1400s and 1500s that things really start to shift. In 1497, John Cabot sails for the English and explores the Atlantic coast. Soon after that, Jacques Cartier travels the St. Lawrence River, claiming the land for France. His voyages basically blew the doors wide open for European settlement and the super lucrative fur trade. That brings us right into Section 2, Empires and Rivalries. So looking at the dynamic here, on one side we have French New France. Their booming 17th century economy was actually built almost entirely on the back of a giant rodent, the beaver. They formed deep strategic alliances with indigenous nations, trading European goods for those highly prized beaver pelts. But on the flip side, we have British expansion. Britain wanted control of North America too, which, as you can imagine, led to decades of bitter conflict. This whole struggle really climaxed during the 7 Years' War. Specifically, in 1759, British forces captured Quebec at the famous Battle of the Plains of Abraham. By 1763, the Treaty of Paris officially handed most of the French-Canadian territories straight over to Britain. Now, this right here is a massive turning point. The British easily could have forced assimilation. That was basically the standard playbook for empires at the time, right? Just completely forcing a conquered population to abandon their language and their religion. But instead, they actively avoided that path. They allowed the people to preserve much of their French culture. And this single critical decision laid the permanent groundwork for that uniquely bilingual character that absolutely defines Canada today. Just as things were starting to settle down, another seismic shift happened right next door, the American Revolution. Following American independence, thousands of loyalists, the folks who still fiercely supported Britain, they fled north seeking refuge in Canada. This sudden influx caused a massive demographic shift. It radically transforms the population, rapidly expanded towns, and accelerated the growth of entirely new provinces. Moving along to Section 3, Birth of Modern Canada. Let's jump to July 1, 1867. Now, what's really interesting about this date is that it's the exact moment 4 distinct regions, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, decided to unite. This monumental event is known as Confederation, and it marks the official birth of the Dominion of Canada. While they were still connected to Britain, this unification meant Canada finally gained domestic self-rule. They were finally taking much greater control over their own government and their own destiny. But to physically connect this massive new nation, they had to pull off one of the absolute greatest engineering triumphs of the era, the Canadian Pacific Railway. I mean, this wasn't just laying down a train track. By stretching thousands of kilometers across the continent, it literally stitched the Atlantic and Pacific coasts together. This incredible feat fueled rapid economic growth and made it actually possible to expand settlement all across that vast western wilderness, turning empty landscapes into thriving communities. Of course, you can't build a massive railway or settle a wilderness that huge without people, right? To pull this off, Canada relied heavily on immense waves of global immigrants. People arrived from Europe, Asia, and eventually from every single continent on the globe, all seeking new opportunities. They came over to build farms, industries, railroads, and those booming cities we see today. This era essentially jump-started the incredible, highly multicultural legacy that is so recognizable when we look at modern Canada. And that leads us to Section 4, Forging an Independent Identity. This unique identity truly began to take shape with immense bravery on the global stage. Back in 1917, the Canadian victory at the Battle of Vimy Ridge became this incredibly powerful symbol of national pride and growing independence. Then, just 2 decades later, their massive contributions during the Second World War helped defeat Nazi Germany and really solidified their growing international reputation. And this newfound confidence showed up culturally too. By 1965, Canada adopted that iconic red and white maple leaf flag, which instantly became a globally recognized symbol. Finally, jumping to 1982, we see the ultimate political milestone. The Constitution was officially patriated. Now, patriation might sound like a bit of a mouthful, but it's a uniquely Canadian term. This was the 1982 process that gave Canada full legal independence from the British Parliament once and for all. But why does this actually matter to the average citizen? Well, it's because this process officially established the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This legally guaranteed crucial civil liberties and fundamentally strengthened their modern democracy. 2 million. Yes, you heard that right. 2 million is the estimated number of lakes in Canada. To put that crazy number into perspective, Canada actually has more lakes than the rest of the entire world combined. No way, right? Beyond its political history, this is a nation completely defined by the sheer scale of its breathtaking geography and incredible wildlife. From polar bears and wolves up in the Arctic under the northern lights to moose, black bears, and whales, Canada's vast, pristine wilderness is just an absolute cornerstone of its global identity. Let's transition over to Section 5, the modern economic powerhouse. And this breakdown brilliantly illustrates a really cool dual economy. While Canada definitely continues to rely on immense traditional resources, things like timber, minerals, oil, natural gas, and of course all that invaluable fresh water, they're simultaneously seeing this explosive, rapid growth in advanced, future-focused industries. We're talking sectors like technology, AI, aerospace, and clean energy. And all of this is fueling a modern economy that's concentrated in some of the most highly livable urban centers on the planet, places like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. All this economic wealth allows Canada to profoundly impact the rest of the world, and honestly, maybe even your own life. They show immense leadership in international peacekeeping, not to mention making massive strides in space technology and medical innovation. Domestically, their post-war adoption of universal healthcare really speaks to their societal values, making sure everyone has access regardless of their income. And those same values mirror their broader global commitment to environmental well-being, especially since those vast forests act as a super vital carbon sink in the worldwide fight against climate change. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Facing the Future. At the very forefront of looking to the future is reconciliation. This is the ongoing process of recognizing historical injustices against Indigenous peoples and supporting stronger, much more equitable partnerships moving forward. It is incredibly important to understand that despite all of the country's amazing modern successes and high standard of living, reconciliation remains a vital, ongoing, and deeply necessary effort in 21st century Canada. And alongside reconciliation, Canada is grappling with several other massive 21st century challenges. These include the really urgent need for climate change adaptation, some intense housing affordability issues in their booming cities, managing complex modern immigration systems, and strategically protecting their vast, resource-rich Arctic territories. These are for sure significant hurdles, yet as we've seen throughout this explainer, the country possesses a profound historical resilience, a spirit of cooperation, and a really strong determination to adapt to these new realities. So what does this all mean for the road ahead? How does a massive nation continue to balance its incredible natural wealth with historical reconciliation and complex modern global challenges? Canada's story is one of exploration, immense diversity, courage, and constant evolution. It truly is a place where deep nature and cutting-edge innovation exist side by side. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer journey to understand the making of Canada. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and I'll catch you in the next one.